come to the urgent question, let the front benches change over. Let us come to the urgent question. Shall the Secretary of State for Defence, James Cartlidge?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To ask the Secretary of State for Defence if he will make a statement on Ukraine.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday at the Ukraine Defence Contact Group chaired by the Defence Secretary, we saw almost 50 nations and partners standing together. Ukraine is backed by the members of the Ukraine Defence Contact Group and backed by billions of dollars worth of arms and ammunition, committed to keep their warfighters equipped. This will increase pressure on Putin to help force him to the table and bring a sustainable peace closer. We were pleased that Secretary Hegseth confirmed the US's continued commitment to this group, to Ukraine's pursuit of what he called a durable peace, and the importance of security guarantees. We heard his call for European nations to step up. Well, Mr. Speaker, we are and we will. NATO allies pledged €40 billion in 2024 and went on to provide €50 billion. The majority of that came from European nations, while non-US NATO allies boosted wider defence spending by 20% in just the last year. So Europe is stepping up. Finally, we saw a clear commitment to ratchet up the pressure on Putin with both military and economic tools. We all agree that 2025 will be the critical year for Ukraine. At this crucial moment, we will not step back, but step up our support to Ukraine. President Trump and President Zelensky have both spoken of their desire to achieve peace through strength. The commitments made yesterday provide the collective strength we need to achieve peace. For our part, the UK will spend £4.5 billion on military support for Ukraine this year, more than ever before. We've now provided over 500,000 artillery shells worth over £1.5 billion. Yesterday, the Defence Secretary announced we will provide an additional £150 million of new firepower, including drones, tanks and air-to-air missiles. Ukraine's security matters to global security. It's why the vital UDCG coalition of 50 nations and partners stretches from the Indo-Pacific to South America. Because this war was never about the fate of just one nation. When the border of one country is redrawn by force, it undermines the security of all nations. The US is serious about stability in the Indo-Pacific, as are we. That's why the Prime Minister announced that the Carrier Strike Group will go there next year. If aggression goes unchecked on one continent, it emboldens regimes on another. So, on stepping up for Ukraine, we are and we will. On stepping up for European security, we are and we will.
James Cartlidge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very grateful to you for granting the UQ, given that we are in recess next week and the day we return will be the 3rd anniversary of Putin's unprovoked illegal invasion of Ukraine. In the 3 years since, Russia has inflicted unimaginable levels of suffering on Ukraine, with military and civilian loss of life on a vast scale, and at the hands of a dictator oblivious to such consequences and only too willing to sacrifice his own soldiers to the meat grinder. In the face of so many casualties and so much pain, of course, we all want to see peace. We all want the senseless slaughter to stop and Ukraine once again able to thrive and enjoy the trappings of peace and prosperity that we all take for granted. It is also clear that an end to this suffering is a goal that President Trump wishes to achieve rapidly, as he set out to the American people before securing their support and his second mandate for the White House. But, Mr. Speaker, we remain 100% steadfast in our support for Ukraine, in our backing for the government in delivering that, as they did when in opposition, and we agree in principle with them that, as we also stressed repeatedly in government, it is for the Ukrainians to decide the timing and terms of any negotiations on ending the war. So does the Minister agree that negotiations without the direct involvement of Ukraine would be unthinkable? What more can the Minister say about how they will work with allies to ensure that any negotiations are driven by the primacy of Ukraine's needs, not least given its status as the democratic nation invaded without provocation by a dictator? Of course, Mr. Speaker, we welcome the news from the Minister about the commitments given by other European NATO nations this week. But is it not the case that President Trump has been right to consistently highlight the way some NATO nations spend far below what is expected and required on defence? And can the Minister assure the House that through every possible lever at their disposal, the government will be reminding all NATO members that if Putin is seen to somehow win from any settlement, that may bring a temporary end to the conflict, but it will not make the world a safer place. Far from it, this would be an illusion of peace, likely to send a very dangerous signal to other potential adversaries. Yeah. Of course, the position expressed, Mr. Speaker, by both the US President and his Defence Secretary yesterday carries huge implications for our own defence policy. They've made it abundantly clear the US will play no role in any future peacekeeping effort in Ukraine, should that be necessary. So while the government will, of course, be cautious to contemplate publicly the implications of this, isn't the key point straightforward, Mr. Speaker? If higher defence spending was urgent before, it is now critical.
Minister.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to welcome the fact that there still is a consensus across this House in the main for supporting Ukraine. I think that's been a tremendously important part of the support we've been able to give over the previous 3 years and before to the Ukrainians. The Honourable Gentleman said that there shouldn't be negotiation about Ukraine without Ukraine, and my right honourable friend, the Defence Secretary, has made that clear in his remarks yesterday. NATO's job is to put Ukraine in the strongest possible position for any talks, but there can be no negotiation about Ukraine without Ukraine being involved. So we want to see a durable peace and no return to conflict and aggression. That's the only way in which this war can end with the kind of security that President Trump and Secretary Hegseth have referred to.
Rachael Maskell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We are all conscious of this third-year anniversary of the invasion of Ukraine, and of course our thoughts are with the people of Ukraine at this time. However, there can be no peace without justice, and therefore it is welcome that countries are collaborating to try and bring a de-escalation of the war. But can she say what they're doing to focus on the justice system to ensure that war criminals are tried and justice is brought to the Ukrainian people?
Minister.
My honourable friend makes an important point, and we have always said that this has to be a just peace, and that those who've committed war crimes during this invasion of Ukraine need to be pursued for it.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson MacCleary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, the leader of my party warned the Prime Minister that we might be facing the worst betrayal of a European ally since Poland in 1945. The hours since have confirmed our fears. This is a moment of great peril for us all. Does the Minister agree with me that the US's actions are a betrayal of our Ukrainian friends who have fought so hard for their freedom, and of the UK and of all of our European allies as well? Will the government step up and show British leadership, starting by passing urgent legislation to seize the frozen Russian assets so we can support Ukraine, whatever the US does? And clearly, in light of the events of the past 24 hours, the government needs to look again at defence spending. Does she agree with me that the decision of the previous government to continue with the cut to the army of 10,000 troops at a time when war is raging on our continent now looks utterly unforgivable?
Well, I don't accept what the Honourable Gentleman said about being betrayed by our allies. The US Secretary for Defence has made it clear that he wants a durable peace, and that is what he and the President are proceeding to try and obtain, so I don't accept that point. In terms of our own forces, we are seeking to make sure that recruitment, which has failed over the last number of years to meet the targets that have been set for it, is improved so that the numbers that we have in our armed forces can be up to full strength.
Sir Edwards.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank the Minister for her statement and for the additional support that the government has announced. Ukraine, the UK supporting Ukraine is essential so that the annual £3 billion pledge continues. And does the Minister agree that working alongside our allies in these turbulent times is even more essential to bring about an end to this war?
I agree with my honourable friend, and it's absolutely clear that any such negotiations must involve Ukraine, and that they must be happy with the peace that is negotiated. Our role at present, whilst the fighting is still going on in a very fierce manner in that country, is to put them in the strongest possible position that we can in order to enable them properly to negotiate.
Speaker,
I welcome what the Minister said from the dispatch box. Can I ask the Minister if she agrees with me that in this new world and in the event of any peace deal, that the United Kingdom and its European allies must lead in providing Ukraine with military support and potentially military presence across land, air and sea to give Ukraine confidence that any peace will endure? And can I assure the government that it will have my support if that's what it decides to do?
I thank the right honourable gentleman for his remarks, and of course he played a part when he was in office in dealing with these matters, and so is very knowledgeable about them. I can confirm that we aim to put Ukraine in the strongest possible position to enable it to negotiate, and that involves continuing to supply them with the arms and weapons that they need in order to fight, because fighting is still going on in a very fierce manner in that country, so we need to step up and make sure we do that. Certainly, over the last period of time, the EU and European nations who are involved in the coalition to support Ukraine have given the majority of military aid and support, 58% of it, as confirmed by the Secretary-General of NATO yesterday. 58% of the support they had last year was from European nations. So European nations are stepping up. We must continue to do so.
Louise Jones.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the Minister's comments that Ukraine's security is indivisible from global security. Does she agree with me that we must, in the UK, stand firm against those who believe that you can take land by aggression, and make sure that we continue to send a strong signal around the world that larger nations cannot just grab bits of smaller nations as and when they please?
Well, I think my honourable friend is correct, and as I said in my response to the original question, it's important that we deter that kind of behaviour wherever it's seen around the world.
Wendy Chamberlain.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think what's quite clear from events of the last few hours is that the Atlantic and the High North is of increasing critical concern, and indeed, as a former member of the Scottish Affairs Committee, we looked at it in the last Parliament. I know the Government has had conversations with Denmark, but what other conversations is it having with its joint expeditionary force partners to ensure that those forces are given the support and resources that they need?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Government has continuing and ongoing discussions with our partners in Europe and in the High North.
Graeme.
Thank you much, Mr. Speaker. Does the Minister agree with me that this announcement should not affect the UK and this House's support for Ukraine? And can she reassure me that she will work with our armed forces and our defence industries to ensure we are doing everything possible to support Ukrainian forces on the front line?
My honourable friend is correct. We are doing, but need to continue to step up our capacity to support Ukraine with weapons and the force that they need to deter ongoing aggression, and to make sure they're in the strongest possible position in any negotiations that they decide to enter.
So, Julian.
Will the government impress on President Trump at every possible opportunity that the reason why appeasement led to World War II was that it left a vacuum in Europe, whereas the reason why the occupation of Eastern Europe at the end of that war did not lead to World War III was that the United States filled any possible vacuum and contained further aggression. So if he is going for a settlement against the wishes of the Ukrainian people, the least he can do is to guarantee directly the security of that part of Ukraine which remains unoccupied.
Yeah. Well, the honourable gentleman has a longer history of supporting deterrence in this chamber, whichever side of the House he has been on. whether nuclear or whether short of that threshold. And he makes the same point again. And the US Secretary of State for Defence, in his remarks to the contact group, did make it clear that deterrence is important around the world. So I think that there is an agreement there.
Akehurst.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the announcement of the new £150 million package of military firepower, including drones, tanks and air defence systems for Ukraine. How does the Minister see this boosting Ukrainian resilience and the UK defence sector?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it does both, because there's only one way in which we can provide the Ukrainians with increasing amounts of munitions and things like drones, which are developing rapidly and changing rapidly, and that is by boosting the strength of our defence industries. And that has the additional importance of enabling us as a nation to boost our capacity to deter any potential aggression. And so, in that sense, Mr. Speaker, we can do both, and we are.
Alistair Carmichael.
Mr. Speaker, viewed from Washington, the idea of carving up the map in Europe might look like a pragmatic deal, even if history tells us that that always ends badly. But surely in Europe we understand that no matter what we give Vladimir Putin, he is always going to want more. Yes. So is that the context in which the Strategic Defence Review is being carried out? And does the Minister accept that this is a moment which is going to require a fundamental reset of our relations with our European partners, and not just in defence, and also for us to get real about the financial and economic implications of that?
Yeah. Well, I can assure the honourable gentleman that the Strategic Defence Review is about identifying threats that we face now rather than threats that we perhaps faced before the Ukraine war began. And so I can tell him that it is being conducted with that in mind. And in terms of the deterrence that we need to be able to provide and the money that's needed to be spent to provide it, the commitment is, as it has been, that, as the Prime Minister has said, that he will set out a path to 2.5% once the Strategic Defence Review has been published, and we expect that to be in the spring.
Mr. Speaker, and as the Minister will know from her many welcome visits, the Filton and Bradley Stoke constituency is home to many vital defence companies who are playing their role in this vital conflict. And would she agree with me that it's crucial that we continue to support companies right here in the UK to get the military kit needed into the hands of those who need it most in Ukraine?
I agree very much with my honourable friend, and I have had the pleasure to visit her constituency on a number of occasions. And I did visit when it was her predecessor's constituency as well. And so I'm well aware of the strength of the industrial base that she has over there, the defence industrial base. And we do need to strengthen it across our nations and regions, and we are doing. And that has the additional importance of providing deterrence for our nation as well as supporting Ukraine.
Sir Bernard Jenkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Minister agree that this does clarify what the benchmark of success for the Defence Review must be? And some of the defence chiefs have been expressing this, thus that we must be ready to fight a war with Russia if necessary in order to be able to deter Russia, and if we are to be in any position to guarantee the security of an independent and sovereign Ukraine after whatever is agreed between President Trump and President Putin.
Well, I agree with the right honourable gentleman. We all agree that defence spending needs to increase. That must be done in the context of us setting out in the SDR precisely where we see the threats. It's important to spend the money that we do spend correctly in the best possible way. And I don't think there's any real disagreement across the chamber about that. And we will see in due course when the Strategic Defence Review is published and we set out the path to 2.5%, whether or not in the spring, whether or not those challenges are met.
Martin Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I welcome that any negotiations about Ukraine must involve Ukraine. And in that spirit, can I ask the Minister if she or any of her colleagues have had conversations with their counterparts in Ukraine following these very recent developments to find out how they are feeling? And if not, do they plan to soon?
Well, personally I have not, but I know that my right honourable friend has been having discussions, and indeed our discussions are ongoing very frequently. I have had contact with my counterparts in Ukraine, just not since yesterday.
Brendan O'Hara.
Yesterday, no matter how we in this House wish it wasn't the case, the people of Ukraine were betrayed and the crimes of aggression and annexation rewarded in a telephone call between Washington and Moscow. And right now, we have to be building closer partnerships with our European allies for whom democracy, sovereignty and the rule of law still actually means something. And I welcome the government's announcement that they defend the territorial integrity of Ukraine. But could she set out for the House how will her government do that in the face of two men who believe that because of their military superiority, they can do whatever they want to whomever they want?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the US Secretary of State for Defence made it clear yesterday that any peace negotiations that the Americans are involved in need to lead to a durable peace that does not see a resumption of the aggression that has led to this war, and we support that. And we've made it quite clear also that these negotiations must involve Ukraine. Of course they must. That is the way in which this war will finally end.
Joanna Baxter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the Minister's statement, particularly the commitment that any negotiations about Ukraine must involve Ukraine, because if reports of the call between President Trump and Moscow are to be believed, then this is less the art of a deal and more a charter for appeasement. So, can the Minister state whether we will be working with NATO allies to establish a clear roadmap with defined timeframes for Ukraine's membership, ensuring long-term deterrence against further inevitable Russian aggression?
Mr. Speaker, we've always said that Ukraine's rightful place is in NATO, and our position is that Ukraine is on an irreversible path to NATO membership. But we've also been clear, always been clear, that this is a process which takes time. I've already said quite clearly that the fate of Ukraine in these negotiations can't be determined without Ukraine being fully involved, and that is our priority. At the moment, to put them in the strongest position, war fighting is still happening, to put them in the strongest possible position to negotiate from strength.
Sir John Whittingham.
In 1994, Russia, along with the UK and the US, signed the Budapest Memorandum pledging to respect the sovereignty and the territorial integrity of Ukraine. Given the flagrant breach of that undertaking by Russia, why should Ukraine believe a word that Putin says without concrete security guarantees?
The honourable gentleman is correct that there must be security guarantees. And the US Defence Secretary said as much, that there must be security guarantees. These are all matters for any negotiations that take place, and of course we will be supporting Ukraine, and we've made quite clear that there cannot be a peace that doesn't involve Ukraine and that they don't support.
Bill Brittle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Minister assure the House today that it is UK government policy not only that Ukraine must be involved in a peace, but also securing its territorial integrity, but that it is only the Ukrainian people, not President Trump nor President Putin, that can determine the destiny of Ukraine?
I think it's quite clear if we say that Ukraine must be involved in those negotiations, and that peace negotiations need two sides to come to an agreement, that it therefore follows that the Ukrainians must be content with whatever the process comes up with. There must be security guarantees, the peace must be durable, and everybody agrees with that.
Richard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Is the Minister concerned that President Trump is repeating false Kremlin propaganda and perpetuating a gross misrepresentation of the war in Ukraine?
by suggesting, and I quote, that for Ukraine, this was not a good war to go into. Will the UK government be making it clear to the US President in no uncertain terms that Ukraine has just defended itself from invasion, bombing, rape, murder, occupation, and that it is an outrage for President Trump to suggest that Ukraine should give up its sovereign territory to Russia?
We've made it quite clear with our 100-year partnership with Ukraine that we back them in the long term. We've supported them with support across this chamber from many parties over a number of years to ensure that they can continue their fight, and that we will continue to support them during any negotiations that there are, so that they can get the peace that they wish to have.
Lawrence Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister's commitment to continued defence support to Ukraine is essential, and I'm sure the House's thoughts are with those Ukrainians fighting for their freedoms and all those Ukrainians in our own communities who have found sanctuary here. Does she agree that any settlement cannot be a repeat of the Budapest Memorandum or the Minsk agreements, which failed to deter future Russian imperial aggression?
Mr. Speaker, I think everybody agrees that any peace that's negotiated must be durable, and that will require security guarantees given the past experience that the Ukrainians have of Russian aggression.
Sir Gavin Williamson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the Minister will be aware, much of the Russian war effort has been sustained by other nations, including a large number of the BRIC nations, supporting Russia through either direct military aid or dual-use products. What is the Minister doing to try and deter that flow of arms that's continuing to sustain Russia?
Well, the Right Honourable Gentleman will know very well that there are sanctions that we do our best to police, and that has had some impact. And I think that has to continue, both whilst the war is still ongoing and whilst the peace is being considered and negotiated.
Peter Swallow.
Mr. Speaker, all wars end, but I know it is the feeling of members across the House that we very much owe it to the men and women fighting for Ukraine, that when this war ends, it does so with Ukraine in a position of strength at the table and on terms and timescales that Ukraine can really be in the driving seat for.
So I agree with my honourable friend that Ukraine needs, we need to continue to support them, to put them in the strongest possible position, both whilst they are war-fighting and during any negotiations that take place.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could we just take one moment to reflect on the hundreds of thousands of lives that have been lost in this war? Ukrainian civilians, Ukrainian soldiers, Russian soldiers, and all of those families that are mourning today. And that efforts were made by Latin American, African leaders and the Pope to try and negotiate earlier on to bring an end to this war. And that we now have possibly an opportunity to demonstrate that one country should never occupy another. And does she believe that there is any possibility in the near future of a ceasefire ahead of negotiations which would be acceptable to obviously the people of Ukraine as well as the rest of Europe, because we do need to see an end to this ghastly conflict?
Well, the Right Honourable Gentleman is correct that conflicts such as this need to come to an end as soon as that is possible. But and so I do acknowledge the point that he makes about death on all sides and how bad that is. But I think that it's important for any peace that might be negotiated to be durable and to be lasting. And so we therefore need to focus our minds at present on supporting Ukraine as much as we can to go into any such negotiations in the strongest possible position.
James Wilde.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Given Putin's illegal invasion and declared intent, does the government agree that any negotiations must result in a sovereign Ukraine, and the UK will play its part in providing security guarantees that are meaningful, unlike those in the past, as that is crucial to securing a lasting peace?
He's right that security guarantees are likely to be an important part of any peace agreement given the past history. We have a 100-year partnership with Ukraine. We're committed to ensuring that they can defend their sovereign capability to continue to exist. And so, whilst it's too early to talk about any details of what those security guarantees might be, we are very committed to making sure that Ukraine can continue as an independent state.
We're Hamas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Monday, there will be a concert in Bath Abbey in support of Ukraine. My Bath constituents have been unstinting in their support for Ukrainians living amongst us, but also Ukrainian communities like Alexandria. Now is not the point to weaken our support. How will the government ensure that Ukraine's voice is heard loud and clear in any peace talks, and that no European countries will ultimately or can potentially be bullied by the US President Trump?
Well, I agree very much with the Honourable Lady when she says that our Ukrainian friends who are here in this nation have received a lot of support, not only in her constituency, but across the UK from their friends and neighbours, and that will continue. We have a 100-year partnership with Ukraine. We've supported them through the toughest times of this war with help and arms and necessary support. We will continue to do so.
David Munda.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure the Minister will, like me, acknowledge the huge effort of the Ukrainian diaspora in the UK, of which a large proportion are in Scotland and particularly in and around my own constituency. And therefore, given the huge efforts that they've made, does she agree with me that we must not, in the coming weeks, convey that we have in any way let them or their countrymen down?
I do agree with that. We have no intention, I think, in any part of this House of doing so.
Yeah, I'm also surprised by called so early. Thank. No. Grab the chance, you know. Can I thank the Minister very much for her answers. It's very obvious to me and to all members of this House that the Honourable Lady has a heart that wants to help those in Ukraine, and we appreciate that, especially when it comes from government centrally. I do welcome the potential peace that may come. It has to be a piece of justice, of course. It has to be fair to the Ukrainians, and we do hope that a way can be found. Will the Minister not agree that any signs of negotiation are to be welcomed? However, there can be no doubt that Ukraine retains the support of this House. The Honourable Lady has said it. Everyone has said it. What role will the UK have in ensuring that the people of Ukraine have security from further Russian aggression, as, let's be honest, in a year or two from now, when Putin recalibrates his forces?
Yeah. Well, the Honourable Gentleman's right to raise these concerns, and it's quite clear that any peace that's negotiated, which must be with the consent of the Ukrainians themselves, has to be durable, and to the extent that that requires security guarantees, then they have to be present for it to work.
John Cooper.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. A truism from ancient Roman times is, if you want peace, prepare for war. And I'm glad that the Strategic Defence Review is preparing us for war, sadly, and in slow motion, unfortunately. But will the Strategic Defence Review consider the unlocked back door that is Ireland? Ireland sits out with NATO. The alarm bells are ringing in NATO, that is clear. But Ireland, cash-rich, sits outside NATO, and it's a critical role in defending undersea cables. We learned from the Irish press that their navy is setting sail without the sufficient officers to man their main guns. They're sending out gunboats without guns. What can we do to encourage Ireland to play a full role in what is going to be a confrontation, I think, with Russia?
Well, the Honourable Gentleman is right that we need to prepare. The Strategic Defence Review will set out what the threats are that we face, and we will then turn our attention to making sure that we obtain the capabilities to deal with that matter. And obviously we will look at any weaknesses that there might be, and we will try and shore them up.
Will Forster.
Mr. Speaker, every time President Trump makes a statement about Ukraine, I hear from constituents in Woking that they're terrified for the future of Ukraine, no more so in the last 24 hours. Will the Minister confirm if the British government were consulted or told about President Trump's call with Vladimir Putin beforehand?
Mr. Speaker, I'm afraid it's above my pay grade to know the answer to that question, but I'm sure he'll have an opportunity to ask those as another questions whose pay grade it is not above. But as far as I'm aware, we have had friendly conversations at the Ukraine Defence Contact Group with members of the US administration.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What practical help is the Minister and the Government providing to Ukraine's legal system and their judges to ensure the prosecution of war crimes?
We do have a 100-year partnership with Ukraine, which has been signed, and that will be supporting them in any way in which they feel they need support, where we might be able to offer some support. I can't answer his question today about what help we have given, but I'm absolutely certain that if they ask us for help and that it's considered that our legal profession is able to supply it, that we will think about doing so.
Dr. Ben Spencer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Isn't the lesson from this the importance of military strength, working with all our NATO allies and European allies, but critically being able to stand on our own 2 feet militarily? Don't we need to see defence spending as investment? And in that light, does she wish that we weren't giving however many billion it is to Mauritius and we can invest that money in our defences instead?
Well, we have a commitment, Mr. Speaker, to getting our defence spending back to 2.5% of GDP, and the last time it was at that level, Mr. Speaker, was at the time of the last Labour government.
Right, that completes the urgent question.